The Xenolith transport shuttle descended through the ash-gray sky of Guanak with a low, resonant hum that vibrated in the teeth. From the viewport, Lieutenant Krax observed the neat, grid-like sectors of the human city below, now punctuated by the sleek, angular structures of the occupation garrison. It was a tidy, efficient victory. The humans had surrendered their colony with minimal conflict, their outdated kinetic weapons useless against Xenolith energy shields. Their submission was logical. On the ground, the air tasted of damp concrete and distant ozone. Former civil engineer Jiho stood in a slow-moving line at a distribution point, his ID chip flashing under a scanner held by a Xenolith trooper. The alien's features were hidden behind a smooth, opalescent helmet, its body encased in armor that seemed to drink in the weak sunlight. Jiho accepted his protein ration pack without a word, his eyes briefly meeting the blank visor before flicking away. He was a practical man, built solid and quiet like the bridges he used to design. Resistance was a calculus, and the numbers did not add up. His younger sister, Sumin, waited for him by the entrance to their allocated housing block, a former school. At 19, her anger was still a fresh, hot coal, not yet banked into embers like her brother's. She watched the alien patrols glide through the streets on silent anti-grav sleds. "They walk like they own the ground," she muttered as Jiho approached. "They do," Jiho said, his voice low. "For now, keep your head down. Work the data farms, stay quiet." "But for how long?" "Until the math changes," he replied, steering her inside. The Xenolith Command Center was a bastion of calm light and silent data streams. Commander Vrail reviewed the latest cultural assimilation reports. The humans were compliant, but their cultural databases were a perplexing tangle of irrationalities. He summoned Lieutenant Krax. "The humans possess extensive narrative records labeled mythology," Vrail stated, his voice a synthesized vibration. "Analyze them. Understanding their irrational fears may expedite control." Krax accessed the files. On his screen, flickering translations of old tales appeared. Stories of shapes in the mirrors, voices in the wind, restless spirits in ancient forests, and mountain guardians who demanded respect. He let out a series of rapid, clicking sounds, Xenolith laughter. "Commander, these are primitive explanations for natural phenomena their science could not comprehend. Fear of the dark, fear of death. They populated the unknown with childish monsters. Use them," Vrail ordered. "Stage a public demonstration. Show the correlation between their primitive beliefs and our advanced perception. Erode their cultural confidence." The announcement echoed through the settlement's public address system. All humans were to assemble in the central plaza at midday for an educational presentation. The plaza was a vast, open space of gray stone, now dominated by a massive holographic emitter the Xenoliths had erected. Humans gathered in subdued clusters, their faces etched with weariness and wary curiosity. Jiho and Sumin stood near the back, close to the edge where the plaza met the old city park. An older man, Tae-suk, leaned against a wall nearby. He was a former maintenance worker for the colony's water systems, a man of few words who kept to himself. His hands, resting at his sides, were rough and calloused. Lieutenant Krax hovered on a platform before the crowd. "People of Guanak," his amplified voice buzzed, "your integration proceeds adequately. Yet, your historical data shows lingering attachments to pre-scientific belief structures. Today, we will illuminate the darkness with reason." The hologram ignited. Towering, cartoonish versions of Korean mythical beings sprang to life. A giggling, bright blue dakibi with a comically large club did a silly dance. A shimmering, sad-faced Guizin floated about, saying "boo" in a hollow voice. The images were crude, mocking. They were followed by dramatic recreations of humans from history cowering in fear from these projections. Xenolith soldiers stationed around the plaza emitted their clicking laughter. "Your ancestors feared what they could not see," Krax proclaimed. "They told stories to explain the wind in the trees or the shadows in a cave." The hologram shifted to show a Xenolith soldier. Their helmet display lit up, revealing a perfect thermal, sonic, and spectral scan of the same forest, showing every animal, every insect, the heat of the rocks. We have light. We have sensors. There is nothing in the dark we cannot see. Your monsters are data points. Your fears are irrelevant. Jiho felt Sumin tremble beside him, not with fear, but with humiliation. Her fists were clenched, her knuckles white. He put a firm hand on her shoulder, a silent command to endure. His own stomach churned with a cold, hard shame. These were the stories his grandmother had whispered to him, not as warnings of monsters, but as lessons about respect, about the world being bigger than oneself. To see them reduced to this, it felt like a violation. Krax's sensor-focused helmet panned over the crowd, lingering on human faces. Do you still believe? Do you still fear the stories of your grandmothers? The silence was heavy, broken only by the hum of the projector. No one answered. To agree was to be ridiculed. To disagree felt like a betrayal. From the back, Taesuk's calm, weathered voice cut through the quiet. You see the shape, but not the substance. Every human head turned slightly. Krax's helmet tilted. Explain. Taesuk pushed himself off the wall. He looked not at the alien, but at the holographic cartoon ghost fading in the air. A story is not a sensor log. It is not about what was there. It is about what is there. The feeling of a place. Krax emitted a dismissive chirp. Feelings are biological static. They are not data. They are not real. Taesuk finally looked at the lieutenant, his eyes holding a depth that the alien scanners could not quantify. Aren't they? He said softly, before turning and walking slowly away from the plaza, back towards the old residential sectors. The demonstration ended. The aliens packed their equipment, their point made. The humans dispersed, heads low. Jiho guided Sumin home, the mocking images of their own culture burning behind his eyes. That night, as the curfew sirens wailed and Xenolith patrols swept their lights across the silent streets, the first of the sensor ghosts began. A fleeting thermal blur, no bigger than a man, registered for 0.3 seconds in the old park near the plaza before vanishing entirely. The patrol log classified it as a system anomaly. A glitch, nothing more. The incident in the park was logged and forgotten. To the Xenolith Armada, a single sensor ghost was a statistical inevitability in a complex biomechanical environment. Lieutenant Krax included a footnote about it in his report to Commander Vrail, framing it as a useful coincidence that reinforced their lesson. The anomaly, he wrote, occurred in the precise location of the demonstration, suggesting human psychological distress can create minor electromagnetic interference, proof of their suggestibility. But the glitches did not stop. They began to spread, a slow, persistent itch in the perfect system of the occupation point 2 days after the plaza event. A perimeter patrol near the old Western Hills reported audio distortions. Their helmet comms, which usually transmitted with crystal clarity, picked up a low, rhythmic sound like distant, slow drumming. It lasted for 12 minutes as they passed a section of overgrown, rocky terrain. Their scanners showed nothing but plant life and stone. The sound ceased the moment they moved beyond a specific, unmarked boundary. The squad leader requested a diagnostic. All systems checked optimal. Jiho heard about it indirectly. He worked long hours in the data farms, a vast, chilly hall where humans cleaned and sorted planetary survey information for Xenolith archives. It was dull, mind-numbing work. A young man named Day, who operated sensor drones for the sanitation corps, whispered to him during a hydration break. My cousin drives a haulage skiff for them, Day murmured, eyes on the Xenolith overseer across the room. He heard the troops talking. They think the old hills are audibly anomalous. They ran full scans. Nothing. It's making them annoyed.
Jiho nodded slowly.
Annoyance was an emotion. The Xenoliths prided themselves on logic. For them to admit to annoyance was a crack in the armor. He said nothing, storing the information away. The next event was more visible. A series of small, abandoned family shrines dotted the edges of the city, places where people used to leave offerings for ancestors. They had been declared off-limits, deemed culturally irrelevant. A pair of Xenolith troopers, bored and curious, decided to investigate one. They used a focused energy pulse to vaporize the old, weathered stone marker. They recorded the act, laughing about clearing superstition. That night, the entire eastern grid of the occupation zone experienced a localized power dip. Not a failure, but a sag, as if something immense had drawn energy for a single second. All the security drones in that sector simultaneously dropped 2 meters in altitude before rebooting. Their footage of the event showed only a brief, sprawling shadow flickering across the ground. A shadow that did not match any structure or moving object. The 2 troopers who had vandalized the shrine were found at their post, unconscious. Their vital signs were stable, but their neural activity showed unusual patterns, akin to a deep, dreamless sleep. They could not be roused. Commander Vrail reviewed the data in his sterile command suite. "Explain," he demanded, the single word vibrating with displeasure. Krax stood at attention. "A simultaneous technical malfunction, Commander. A surge from the planetary grid interacting with our systems. The soldier's condition is a medical anomaly, likely a shared somatic response to an unexpected energy fluctuation. And the shadow? A composite error in the drone's visual processors during reboot. A trick of the light." Vrail was silent for a long moment. The human, Tae-suk. He spoke of the feeling of a place. Locate him. Bring him in for questioning. But Tae-suk was not hiding. He was in his allocated living pod, a small, neat space in a rundown residential block. He was polishing an old, brass navigation compass that had belonged to his father. He did not look surprised when 2 Xenolith troopers appeared at his door. The interview room was cold and bright. Krax sat across from Tae-suk, a recorder between them. "The incidents," Krax began. "The sounds, the power loss, the soldiers. You implied knowledge. Explain." Tae-suk held the compass in his hands, his thumb rubbing its glass face. "I said you see the shape, not the substance. You vaporized a stone. You think you erased a thing. You did not erase the reason the stone was there. Sentimental attachment is not a physical force," Krax stated. "No," Tae-suk agreed quietly. "But memory is. That stone was placed by a son for a father who died in a landslide, right there digging others out. That pain, that love, it soaks into the ground. It becomes part of the place. You don't have to believe in it for it to be there. You just have to be loud enough to wake it up." Krax's head tilted. "You are speaking metaphorically. You are suggesting a non-corporeal, historical residue influences physical machinery. It is irrational." Tae-suk finally looked up, his eyes meeting the blank helmet. "Is it? Your machines read the physical world. What if some things in the physical world are recordings, and your noise is hitting the play button?" Meanwhile, Sumin had taken a different risk. Frustrated and angry, she had begun sneaking out after curfew. She stayed in the shadows, moving through the abandoned service tunnels she and her friends had used as kids. She wanted to see, to understand. One night, from a broken vent overlooking the old park, she saw a Xenolith patrol. Their helmet lights swept the ground. Suddenly, all 4 soldiers stopped. They turned their heads in unison, as if following a moving sound. Their lights crossed, creating a tangled web of beams. For a second, the lights seemed to catch on something. A faint, shimmering outline of a figure, tall and indistinct, standing by a gnarled old tree. Then it was gone. The soldiers stood frozen for a full 5 seconds before moving on. Their movements stiff, confused. Sumin's heart hammered against her ribs. It wasn't a ghost from a story. It was something else. A wrongness. A reaction. Tae-suk's words echoed in her mind. "You just have to be loud enough to wake it up." The next morning, Commander Vrail made a decision. The incidents were damaging morale and efficiency. He would not entertain superstition, but he would crush the symbol of it. He would prove, once and for all, the power of logic over myth. He ordered a company of soldiers, with heavy construction drones, to the largest and oldest site on the colony, the Memorial Grove on the northern hill. It was a place of quiet walking paths and stone tablets engraved with the names of Guanac's first settlers, of those lost in the long journey from Earth. It was not a shrine to any god, but to community and sacrifice. Vrail's command was simple, broadcast to the entire human population. We will clear this neglected area. We will build a new sensor array tower in its place. This will illuminate the darkness permanently. There is nothing here but stone and dead names. The humans heard the announcement with a dread that was deeper than fear. It was a profound, collective hurt. Jiho, listening at the data farm, felt it like a cold stone in his gut. This was different. This was not mocking a story. This was erasing a heartbeat. As the company of Xenolith soldiers and their massive drones marched up the hill towards the silent grove, the air grew very still. The birds stopped singing. The leaves on the trees hung motionless. Down in the city, Taesuk stood at his small window watching the hill. He closed his hand around the brass compass, feeling the old metal warm against his skin. "You are not just digging up stone," he whispered to the empty room. "You are digging up a grave." The silence that fell over the memorial grove was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It was a thick, waiting quiet that pressed against the ears. The Xenolith soldiers, led by a seasoned sergeant named Rel, felt it as a pressure change on their external sensors. Their systems automatically compensated, creating a low hum inside their helmets to counter the unnatural stillness. It felt, one soldier would later report in a confused medical debrief, like walking into a room where everyone has just stopped talking. The construction drones hovered at the tree line, their heavy rock cutters and plasma torches dormant, awaiting the order. Rel surveyed the grove. It was simple, almost plain. Stone pathways weaved between native trees. Low stone tablets, worn smooth by weather and time, were set into the earth, each inscribed with names in human script. No technology, no energy signatures, no hidden defenses. Just old rock and quiet dirt. "Proceed with clearing." Rel's voice crackled in the squad's comms, flat and professional. "Start with the perimeter markers. Drones, begin tree removal." A soldier stepped towards the first stone tablet. He activated a small vibrational tool designed to fracture rock with minimal noise. As he knelt, his knee pressed into the soft earth beside the stone. His sensor feed flickered for a single instant, a surge of thermal data showing a brief, impossible spike of heat from the ground itself, gone before he could process it. He dismissed it as a sunspot on his lens. He placed the tool. The high-pitched whine shattered the silence. At that moment, two things happened simultaneously. Down in the city, every dog began to howl. Not bark, but a long, mournful chorus that rose from backyards and alleys. It was a sound of pure, instinctual distress. In the grove, the soldier's tool bit into the stone. A hairline crack appeared. Then the ground beneath him gave a soft, almost sighing shudder. It was not an earthquake. It was localized, precise, like the tremor of a living thing flinching. Rel's sensors screamed with alerts. Seismic activity, microscale, origin directly under the soldier. Atmospheric anomaly. Localized static charge spiking, causing the fine hairs on the nearby grasses to stand on end. "Hold," Rel commanded. The soldier stood up, looking down at the cracked stone. "Sergeant, it's just..." A whisper filled his helmet. It was not in the air. It was in his audio feed, a direct injection into his comm system. It was a voice, old and strained, speaking in the human language. The soldier didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A profound, weary sorrow. He stumbled back, his hands flying to his helmet. "Do you hear that? The voice." "I hear nothing but your report," Rel stated, but his own sensor log later showed a 0.5-second audio corruption at that exact timestamp, a wave of pattern static. "All units switch to isolated channel gamma," Rel ordered, his own logic now challenged by the converging data. The grove was fighting back with information. Before he could give the next command, the lead construction drone, which had moved to grip a large tree, suddenly went dark. Its anti-grav field failed. It dropped 2 meters and hit the ground with a heavy thud. Its limbs splayed, completely inert. Not damaged, just dead. Then the shadows began to move. It was not a trick of the light. The Zenolith helmet displays had sophisticated shadow mapping software to enhance depth perception. The long shadows cast by the trees began to shift and stretch against their programmed paths, pooling around the soldiers' boots like dark water. The shadows did nothing. They just were, but they were wrong. They moved against the sun's angle. A private, his nerves fraying, raised his pulse rifle. "Show yourselves," he buzzed, aiming at the shifting darkness under an oak tree. "Lower your weapon." Rel barked. It was too late. The private fired a single bright lance of energy into the shadowy base of the tree. The reaction was immediate and violent. Not from a ghost, but from the environment itself. Every insect in the grove, every beetle, every ant, every hidden grub, seemed to react as one. A swarm of winged insects erupted from the bark of the tree, not attacking, but flowing in a frantic, swirling cloud directly into the private's helmet vents. He screamed, clawing at his faceplate as the tiny bodies clogged his filters. His suit's environmental systems went into emergency purge, filling his helmet with a stinging mist. Chaos erupted. Another soldier, turning to assist his comrade, backed into a stone tablet. As his armor touched the engraved names, his heads-up display flooded with rapid, scrolling text. Not human language, but a blizzard of broken data, error codes, and fragmented images. A child's face, a field of wheat, a hand holding another hand. It was a synaptic attack, a direct data dump of what felt like memories into his machine interface. He fell to his knees, groaning. Rel saw his squad, the pinnacle of logical warfare, succumbing not to weapons, but to the world around them. The grove was rejecting them. The air itself felt heavy, resistant, like pushing through deep water. His own breath came harsh in his helmet. "Fall back," he commanded. The order tinged with a frequency his soldiers had never heard from him. Urgency, edged with fear. "All units, retreat to the tree line. Now!" They stumbled back, dragging their incapacitated comrades, leaving the dead drone behind. The moment they crossed the threshold where the grove's old stone archway stood, the pressure lifted. The unnatural silence broke, replaced by the normal sound of the wind. The shadows lay still and ordinary. Back at the garrison, Commander Vrail reviewed the helmet footage and sensor logs. His calm was gone, replaced by a cold, furious confusion. The data was irrefutable and illogical. Physical phenomena were reacting with what seemed like intention. Not strategy, but something more primal. A reflex. He had cracks bring Taesuk before him again, this time in the main command center. Vrail pointed a clawed digit at a frozen image on the screen. The swirling insect cloud. "Explain this." Taesuk looked tired. "You struck a memory, and it flinched. That grove is not just trees. It is a place of arrival, of struggle, of first births and last goodbyes. You did not just cut a tree. You tried to cut a chapter from a book that is written in the soil. The land remembered how to defend its story. This is not science." Vrail's voice was a sharp vibration. "It is a different kind of record," Taesuk said softly. "You read the universe with machines. We learned to read this place with our lives. Every joy, every tear, every hope that was felt there. It soaked in. You are shouting in a library of feeling. And the library is starting to shout back." Vrail dismissed him, but the veteran's words hung in the sterile air. The logic was absurd. Yet the evidence was on the screen. The hidden power was not human technology or human strength. It was human experience, imprinted on the physical world in a way the Zenoliths could sense but not comprehend. And it was awake. For the first time, a sliver of doubt, cold and quiet, wormed its way into the commander's impeccable logic. What if the human's myth was not a story about the dark? What if it was a manual for the land itself? The mood in the Zenolith garrison shifted. It was a subtle change, one that human workers like Jiho noticed before the aliens themselves. The soldiers' movements, usually fluid and precise, now carried a slight hesitance. Their helmeted heads scanned not just for human threats, but seemed to linger on shadowed corners, old walls, and stands of trees. The clicking laughter was gone. Silence had replaced it, a silence that felt heavy with unasked questions. Commander Vrail isolated the data from the Memorial Grove. He ran it through every analytical filter, every decryption protocol. The results were maddening. The phenomena were real: energy fluctuations, localized gravitational variances, coherent information bursts in ambient electromagnetic noise. But they had no source, no device, no hidden generator, no alien technology. It was as if the location itself was the source. It defied physics as he understood it. He needed a new approach. If this was a human weapon, it was psychological. The counter to psychology was overwhelming, undeniable reality. He would demonstrate the ultimate futility of their memory against pure, focused power. He ordered a company-wide assembly in the Central Plaza, the same place where they had mocked the myths. This time, the humans were not invited as an audience. They were ordered to observe from their windows, their doors under threat of curfew violation. This was a message for them, but it was a ritual for his own troops. A reassertion of control from his housing block. Jiho watched through a grimy pane of glass. Sumin stood beside him, her face pale. Down in the plaza, ranks of Xenolith soldiers stood in perfect formation. In the center, Commander Vrail addressed them, his voice amplified and buzzing across the silent city. The recent anomalies are a product of human irrationality affecting unstable systems, Vrail declared. It is noise. We are signal. We will now filter the noise with clarity and force. On the outskirts of the plaza, they had erected a massive, tripod-mounted weapon, a sonic purification array. This purpose was not destruction, but absolute cleansing. It would emit a focused beam of resonant sound waves, calibrated to shatter any irregular molecular structure, clear atmospheric particulates, and neutralize rogue electromagnetic fields. It was a colossal speaker meant to blast away ghosts with pure, rational vibration. The frequency will sterilize the area of all residual irregularities, Vrail continued. We will target the old park, the initial point of contamination. We will show the humans, and ourselves, that there is nothing here that cannot be measured, controlled, and silenced. In his small room, Taesuk did not watch the plaza. He sat on the floor, his back against the wall, eyes closed. He held his father's compass in one hand, and in the other, a small, smooth stone from the river behind his childhood home. He was not praying. He was remembering. He was thinking of picnics in that park, of his first kiss under the big willow tree, of flying a kite with his brother, of sitting with his mother on a bench watching the seasons change. He poured his attention into those memories, not to summon anything, but to honor them, to be present with them. In the plaza, the array powered up with a deep, subsonic thrum that vibrated in the chest. A targeting beam, visible as a shaft of shimmering air, lanced out from the weapon and fixed on the center of the old park, on the very spot where the first sensor ghost had appeared. Activate, Vrail commanded. The sound was not a deafening blast, but a deep, penetrating tone. It was the note of absolute order. Windows in the surrounding buildings rattled. The humans watching felt it in their teeth and bones. It was a sound that sought to flatten everything uneven, to smooth every ripple. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The tone dominated everything. Then, the park answered. It did not answer with a monster. It answered with a song. From the earth, from the trees, from the very stones, a different sound emerged. It was not a single tone, but a chorus. It was the rustle of leaves turned to melody, the trickle of water in the old creek woven into harmony, the creak of branches forming a rhythm. It was faint, almost beneath hearing, but it was there, weaving through and around the Xenolith's cleansing tone. It was complex, beautiful, and achingly sad. The sonic array's readouts went chaotic. The pure frequency was being modulated, altered, broken apart by this emergent environmental counterharmony. The beam began to waver. Then, the shadows in the park deepened. But this time, they did not move. Instead, within them, light appeared. Not Xenolith light, but soft, glowing points like distant lanterns or fireflies. They were will-o'-the-wisps, phenomena known in 100 human myths. They danced at the edges of the sonic beam, not attacking it, but tracing its outline, as if studying it on the plaza. A soldier monitoring the array screamed. A short, sharp electronic burst of shock. His display screen showed not data, but faces. Human faces, hundreds of them, flickering in a rapid, silent cascade. Old, young, smiling, weeping. They were the faces of the people who had lived, loved, and died in Guanak. The data stream had become a flood of stolen memories, of lived moments that were not his own. He tore off his helmet, his alien features exposed to the air for the first time. Gasping, his large eyes wide with a terror that was not of physical harm, but of psychic violation. The chorus from the park grew louder, not in volume, but in clarity. It resolved into something almost recognizable. A folk song, one every child in Guanak knew, a song about coming home after a long journey. The sonic array emitted a screech of feedback and shut down. The deep tone vanished, leaving only the faint, ethereal song from the park, which then gently faded into the normal sounds of the wind. The silence that followed was absolute. The Xenolith ranks stood frozen. The demonstration of ultimate rational power had failed. Worse, it had been answered by something inexplicably more complex, more layered, and more alive. Commander Vrail stood rigid on the platform. His plan to filter the noise had only given the noise a voice. And the voice had sung a human song. From his window, Jiho felt a tear track down his cheek. He didn't know why. It wasn't happiness or victory. It was the profound recognition in that song. Sumin whispered, "They remember. The park remembers us." In his room, Taesuk opened his eyes. He looked at the stone in his hand, then out his small window towards the plaza. "It was never about power," he murmured to the empty air. "It's about connection. You tried to disconnect, and the connection fought back." Down in the plaza, Lieutenant Krax approached Vrail, his usual confidence shattered. "Commander, the science, it does not account for this." Vrail slowly turned his head, looking not at Krax, but at the now quiet park. The hidden power was no longer hidden. It was in the air, in the soil, in the memory of a song. It was not a weapon they could seize or a shield they could break. For the first time, the unthinkable entered the commander's mind. They could not win here. Not because the humans were stronger, but because the ground itself was against them. Panic is a quiet thing for the Xenolith. It does not involve shouting or running. It manifests as a systemic shutdown, a retreat into strict, sterile protocol. After the failure of the sonic array, Commander Vrail ordered a full garrison lockdown. No patrols beyond the perimeter fence. No interaction with the human population beyond the bare minimum for ration distribution. The great machines of occupation sat silent, their purpose stalled. The aliens became prisoners in their own base, watching the world outside their sensors with a new, wary confusion. For the humans, the air changed. The constant, oppressive weight of being watched lightened. A strange, electric calm settled over Guanak. People spoke in normal tones in the streets again. They looked at the old hills and the quiet park not with fear, but with a wondering recognition. Jiho found himself taking a longer route home from the data farms, his feet carrying him past the old community garden, now overgrown. He saw a fresh, perfect flower blooming on a vine that had been brown and brittle just days before. He didn't pick it. He just looked. Sumin, however, was not content with calm. The spark of defiance, once a small ember, was now a flame. She sought out Taesuk. She found him where she suspected she would, not in his room, but sitting on a broken bench by the old creek that ran behind the residential blocks. He was skipping stones across the sluggish water. "What is it?" she asked, sitting beside him without ceremony. "What's really happening?" Taesuk watched a stone hop 3 times before sinking. They thought the land was empty, a place to put a building, a road, a garrison. They didn't know it was already full. Full of what? Ghosts. "No," he said, picking up another flat stone. "Full of us. Of everything that ever happened here. Every time someone laughed so hard they cried in that park. Every time a couple shared a secret by this creek. Every dream dreamed in a bedroom. Every tear shed at a graveside. It doesn't vanish. It soaks in. It becomes part of the place. We just forgot how to listen to it. They made us remember. Sumin processed this, her practical mind wrestling with the idea. So it's like a recording? More like a stain, Taesuk said. A beautiful stain. And their noise, their disrespect, they're trying to scrub it clean. It's like poking a bruise. The whole body reacts. Can we talk to it? The question felt silly as she asked it. Taesuk gave a small, sad smile. We always have. We called them myths. Stories about the mountain guardian who gets angry if you're loud and selfish. About the river spirit that drowns the cruel. They weren't instructions for monsters. They were instructions for us. How to live here without waking the pain that was already sleeping. Meanwhile, inside the garrison, Commander Vrail was at a strategic impasse. His logic offered only two options: escalate or withdraw. Escalation meant orbital bombardment, turning the offending hills and groves into glass. It would prove his power. But it would also admit that the land itself was a valid military target, an idea that felt like a defeat of reason. It would be like using a starship to fight a superstition. He summoned Lieutenant Krax. We will perform one final analysis, Vrail stated. A deep geological and psychic resonance scan of the entire valley. We will map every anomaly, every energy signature. We will find the pattern, the source, and if it is a natural phenomenon, we will catalog it. If it is a weapon, we will identify its mechanism. Then we will decide. The order was given. From the belly of the garrison's command ship, a large, disc-shaped probe was deployed. It rose into the gray sky, humming with power. It was called a Spectre-class scanner, designed to map subterranean resources and hidden energy fields. To the Xenolith, it was a tool of pure science. To the watching humans, it looked like a cold metal eye opening in the sky. The probe began its work. Pale blue scanning beams, visible in the dusk, swept across the city, the parks, the hills. It was reading everything: rock layers, water tables, thermal currents, and the faint, shimmering residue of the emotional stain that Taesuk spoke of. And as it read, it aggravated. All across Guanak, small, quiet phenomena began to occur, not as attacks, but as echoes. In the old schoolhouse, now a barracks, the forgotten chalk dust on a ledge rose into the air and swirled in a miniature vortex, spelling out a child's half-finished math equation before falling. In the market square, the cobblestones, warmed by a scanning beam, released the faint, ghostly scent of baked bread and spiced tea from the cafes that once stood there. A Xenolith soldier standing guard at the perimeter fence heard his dead comm unit crackle to life for a second, playing a fragment of a lullaby. The probe dutifully recorded it all. The data stream flooding back to Vrail was incomprehensible. It was geology mixed with biography. It showed sorrow concentrated in the clay of a riverbank where a woman had mourned her lost love. It showed joy resonating in the stones of a bridge where a festival was held every year. It was a map of human feeling, written in a language of physics he could not translate. The land was not just reacting. It was introducing itself. Then the probe passed over the memorial grove. It focused its most penetrating beam on the heart of the grove, trying to quantify the source of the strongest anomaly. The grove did not flinch this time. It opened on the view screen in Vrail's command center. The data vanished. In its place, for 3 full seconds, was an image. Not a face, not a ghost. It was a feeling, rendered visually. It was the sight of a group of tired, hopeful people in simple clothes, planting the first tree in the grove, their hands in the dirt, their faces shining with a mixture of exhaustion and profound hope. It was the memory of the beginning, the moment the place was made sacred by intention. The emotion behind the image, the hope, the collective love, was so pure, so strong, that it bypassed the Xenolith's emotional dampeners. Every alien in the command center felt it. It was a wave of warmth, of belonging, of a purpose deeper than conquest. For a species that valued logic above all, it was a devastating experience. It was a truth they had no defense against. The probe emitted a sharp ping and went silent, its systems overloaded by the intensity of the transmission. It drifted lifelessly in the air before its fail-safe thrusters engaged. guiding it slowly back to base. In the silence of the command center, Vrail stared at the now black screen. The final proof was not of a hidden human weapon. It was of a hidden human world, layered right on top of the physical one. They had not conquered Guanic. They had merely been walking on its skin, shouting in its ear. And now, the flesh and bone of the place was pushing them out. He knew then that escalation was pointless. You cannot bomb a memory. You can only make it stronger. The only logical response was retreat. Outside, as twilight fell, the people of Guanic felt a deep, resonant peace settle over their city. The invisible war was over. The land had spoken, and it had said, "You are remembered. You are home." The retreat was not loud. There were no sirens, no victory cheers from the humans. The Xenolith armada simply began to leave. It was a process of quiet, efficient dismantling. The great ships in orbit sent down shuttles that swallowed up the garrison's equipment in neat, silent bites. The soldiers moved with a new kind of stiffness, their movements no longer those of conquerors, but of guests who had overstayed their welcome and were eager to be gone. They did not look at the hills or the groves. They kept their gaze on their work, on the metallic shells of their vessels. Commander Vrail issued no grand statements. A simple, text-only directive was broadcast on all human channels. The Guanic colony no longer aligns with Xenolith's strategic objectives. Evacuation will be completed within 48 standard hours. Compliance is expected. It was the lie of a proud species that could not admit the truth. They were being evicted by a memory. Jiho watched from a rooftop as the massive sonic array was taken apart. The tripod that had aimed to silence the park now lay in pieces on a transport sled. He felt no triumph, only a deep, weary relief. Sumin stood beside him, her arms crossed against the chill. "What happens when they're gone?" she asked. "Does it all go back to sleep? The feeling?" "I don't know," Jiho said honestly. He looked out over the city, his city scarred but still standing. "Maybe it never went to sleep. Maybe we just forgot how loud it could get." In the final hours, Lieutenant Krax sought out Taesuk. He found the old man once more by the creek, this time just standing, watching the water flow. Krax approached without his usual escort, his helmet under his arm. His alien face, pale and fine-boned, was exposed to the open air, his large, dark eyes unreadable. "You are leaving," Taesuk said, not turning. "Yes," Krax replied. His voice, without the helmet's modulator, was softer, more sibilant. "The commander believes the location is environmentally hostile to our systems." A small smile touched Taesuk's lips. "That is one way to say it." Krax was silent for a long moment, watching the human. The data from the probe. The image of the tree planting. What was it? "It was a promise," Taesuk said, finally looking at him. "A group of people, far from home, promising this new land that they would care for it, that they would become part of it, and that it would become part of them. That is the promise you broke. We broke no agreement. There was no contract. Not with us," Taesuk said, his voice gentle. "With the land itself. You can't see it, so you think it isn't there. But step on a man's foot, and he will yell. You stepped on this place's soul." It yelled. Krax absorbed this, his logical mind struggling with the metaphor. "So it is a living entity? A planetary consciousness?" "No." Taesuk shook his head. "It's just a place. But a place is more than dirt and rock. It's everything that has ever happened there. All that joy, all that pain, it gets woven into the fabric of things. We call it Han. A sorrow that becomes part of you, and part of the ground you walk on. And Zhong. The deep connection that grows from shared history. You poured scorn on our Han, and tried to sever our Zhong. The fabric tore, and the tear pushed back." Krax looked down at his own three-fingered hand, then at the flowing water. He had scanned that water. It was H2O, minerals, trace biologics. According to his science, that was all it was. But now he wondered what the water remembered. Had children played in it? Had lovers met by its side? The questions felt irrational, and yet they were the only ones that fit the data. We studied your myths as fiction, Krax said quietly. As fear. They were never about the monster under the bed, Taesuk said. They were about the bed itself. The home, the village, the mountain. They were rules. Be respectful. Be mindful. You are not alone here. You are part of a story that started long before you and will continue long after. The monsters were just what happened if you forgot. The last of the shuttles were loading. Krax replaced his helmet, his face disappearing behind the opalescent shell. Your hidden power was not a weapon, he said, the modulator buzzing once more. It was a history we could not conquer. Yes, Taesuk nodded. Because you cannot conquer a story. You can only become part of it. And in this story you were the loud, rude stranger. And the house asked you to leave. Krax gave a slow, stiff nod, a gesture he had learned from humans. He turned and walked away, joining the final line of soldiers moving towards the waiting shuttles. He did not look back as the sun set on the second day. The last Xenolith ship lifted from the landing field with a soft, blue glow. It ascended quickly, shrinking to a star, then to nothing against the deepening violet of the sky. The silence that followed was different. It was not the waiting, pressured silence of the occupation. It was their own silence, the normal quiet of evening. A dog barked somewhere, a normal, happy sound. A light wind rustled the leaves in the park. Ji-ho and Su-min walked down from the rooftop and into the streets. Others were emerging too, tentatively, looking up at the empty sky. No one celebrated. They just breathed. They touched the walls of their buildings. They stood on the grass. Taesuk walked slowly to the memorial grove. The stone tablet with the fresh crack was still there. He knelt, not in prayer but in maintenance. He took a cloth from his pocket and gently wiped the dust from the engraved names. He was not alone. Others came, drawn to the grove. They began to clear the fallen branches, to pick up the litter left by the aliens, to tend to the space. It was not a ceremony. It was gardening. It was cleaning the house after the unwanted guests had gone as they worked. The air in the grove felt warm, not with heat, but with a gentle, sun-baked contentment. The hidden power did not vanish. It settled. It hummed at a frequency so low and deep it was felt, not heard. A constant, reassuring presence, like a heartbeat from the ground itself. The myth had been real all along, not as a goblin in the trees, but as the quiet, unyielding truth that some ground is sacred, and that sacred ground remembers. The first rains came after the Xenolith left, a soft, steady wash that cleaned the dust from the streets and the grime from the windows. It felt like a baptism, a gentle return to the old rhythms of the world. Life on Guanak did not go back to the way it was before. It moved forward, but it carried the knowledge of what had happened like a stone in its pocket. A weight that was now familiar, even reassuring. Ji-ho went back to the ruins of the engineering corps offices. With others, he began the slow work of salvage, not just of materials but of purpose. He found himself listening more, to the sound of the wind through a particular alley, to the way the light fell on the plaza at noon. He wasn't waiting for a ghost. He was paying attention. He realized, like respect. Su-min joined a community council. Her anger, once so sharp, had been tempered into a firm resolve. The first project she proposed was not a new building, but a restoration. The old park, the heart of the conflict, was to be cleared of the Xenolith's metal debris, but otherwise left to grow wild. A simple, unadorned stone would be placed near the big willow tree. The inscription, decided by the community, would read, "For the stories that remember us." Months passed. The seasons turned. The Xenolith were gone, but their lesson remained, etched not in metal, but in the awareness of every person. Children played in the memorial grove again, their laughter bouncing off the stone tablets. Parents no longer shushed them near the old shrines. Instead, they would tell them the names carved there, the stories of the people who carried water, who planted seeds, who built the first homes. One evening, Taesuk walked up the northern hill. He moved slower now, a slight ache in his knees from the damp. He sat on a flat rock at the edge of the grove, looking down at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. The hidden power was not a thing to be summoned or a force to be wielded. It was a state of being. A relationship. A young man from the council found him there, a little out of breath.
Tae se oxys esi.
The communications array. We've picked up a signal. It's for you. Tae-suk raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He followed the young man back to the newly rebuilt comm center, a small, bustling room of scavenged parts and determined people. On the main screen was a text transmission, tagged with a Zenolith diplomatic code. It was addressed to him. He read it aloud, his voice calm in the quiet room. Query, the phenomenon. Does it require belief to function? A murmur went through the room. They looked at Tae-suk. He sat at the console, his gnarled fingers hovering over the keys. He thought for a long minute, then typed a reply. No, it requires history. You do not have to believe in a scar for it to exist. You only have to have been wounded. The land here is scarred with our lives. Your noise touched the scars. The reply came faster this time, as if someone had been waiting. Query. Is the phenomenon unique to human-occupied worlds? This was the real question. The fear of a galaxy full of haunted worlds. Tae-suk smiled a little. He typed back. No, it is unique to lived-in worlds. To worlds where beings have loved a place deeply enough to leave a mark. You do not see the mark, so you think the canvas is empty. It is not. Tread softly. There was a long pause. Then, a final transmission arrived. It was not a query. It was a statement in the flat, precise Zenolith language but translated by their system. Understood. The strategy of conquest is being reevaluated for Class 3 emotional resonance worlds. Your designation. Guardians of the Record. We will tread softly. The screen went dark. The room was silent. The Zenolith had not apologized. They had not admitted defeat. They had simply updated their maps. Guanak was now categorized not by its minerals or its location, but by its nature. A place that remembered. Sumin, who had come in during the exchange, let out a slow breath. So that's it? We're guardians of the record now. Tae-suk stood up, his joints popping. We always were. We just forgot the title. He looked around at their faces, young and old, etched with the hardship of occupation and the light of hard-won peace. The power was never hidden in the myths. It was hidden in plain sight, in every time we tended a garden instead of paving it. Every time we told a story about our grandparents on this hill. We were building the record, and the record protects itself. He walked out into the night. The air was cool and clean. He did not go home. Instead, he walked to the old park. The wildflowers had grown thick and tall. The willow tree's branches swept the ground. In the darkness, he could see the soft, phosphorescent glow of tiny fungi on a log, and for a moment, they looked like the will-o'-the-wisps that had danced around the sonic beam. They were just natural things doing what they did, but they were also part of the record. He sat on the new stone bench, feeling the solidity of it. The myth was not a story of the past. It was an instruction for the future. The hidden power was simply this: the profound, unbreakable connection between a people and their home. A connection woven from a million small acts of love and memory. It could not be invaded because it was not a thing to be taken. It was a song, and the land itself had learned the tune. From the city below, the sounds of life drifted up. A shout, a burst of music from a window, the distant chime of a bike bell. It was not the silence of fear. It was the sound of a story continuing. Tae-suk closed his eyes, listening. He was not guarding anything. He was just sitting in his home, part of the record, at peace. The ghosts were just memories, and the memories were finally at rest.